All right. Hopefully they can at least splice that together. We won't lose it. So this hygienic behavior, the bees can actually go in. They might uncap a cell, pull out a baby bee, and take it outside the hive. And they know that if that baby bee were to be born, maybe it's sick, right? Maybe the wings would be deformed. It would never fly. Maybe there's mites that would actually perpetuate more harm to the hive. So this hygienic behavior is also a big thing. Again, if you're picking your bees, you're buying your bees, these are a couple of things to think about: their behavior, how gentle they are, and how hygienic they are. Caucasian bees, again, maybe you'll see a bee in your hive and it looks really dark like this. You're not probably going to know, what kind of bee it is, but um, some other traits, right? They're actually more this type of bee is actually more gentle, but maybe a slower buildup in spring. But if you're in an area that has a harsh winter, right, long or snowy winters, um, maybe this bee could work better for you. Also, and this for me gets a little specialty. If you're a backyard beekeeper, you've got a hive or two. You're probably happy, getting some wax maybe when you're uncapping, or you're happy getting honey, and just participating in the process of taking care of these bees. But sometimes people do focus specialty on certain products out of that beehive, like the wax or the pollen or the propolis. And so that's another thing for me, is a little bit more specialty. Well, you'll see that this Caucasian bee will actually make more propolis on average, than other types of bees. Um, Not to jump too far ahead, right? But propolis, if you don't know what that is, that's the sticky stuff when you open your hive. It looks black. If it's warm out, it can be gummy and sticky. If it's cold out, it looks hard, but it basically acts like a glue. And that propolis is used by the bees. It's actually can be like an antibiotic type of material for them. So humans have taken up also using that material, sometimes for health products and that kind of thing. Second most popular, crinoline. I mentioned this one. I've usually seen these sold out of Hawaii. There's a huge apiary that sells bees out of Hawaii. Um, and so this is a popular race as well, a strain of bee. Um, you see a smaller winter colony. And so, again, if you're in an area that has more harsh winters, this could be a good bee for you, because in essence, you're having to feed it less during that downtime in the winter. And then they wake back up and build up quickly in spring. Russian bees. I don't know if I've ever seen a Russian bee, although I do have two Ukrainian daughters, so they could speak Russian bee. But these bees apparently are more gentle. Um, One other thing. So we've talked about a couple different things. The how gentle the bees are. We've talked about how they might winter and how susceptible they are to those seasons. We just talked about maybe a certain type of product that they produce. A big one, oh, and there is this idea of the hygienic behavior, and varroa mites come into that. So varroa mites are a big deal we'll talk about today. This is a huge threat to bees in the hive, um, whether they're in your backyard or at a commercial apiary. And so bees that are more tolerant to mites or are more hygienic against mites can be, I guess, popular in that sense, right? To be used to combat that issue. Again, we'll talk more about that. Um, a trait out of these bees is that the queen, if there's no nectar, the queen will basically shut down. So I think not just with beekeeping, but like life decisions, business decisions, we're usually in a position where we're doing pros and cons, right? You have two positions. You're like, okay, do I do this? Do I do that? Which one's the better scenario, right? So there's no like perfect answer here. Everybody's going to have a different situation coming in based on your geography, the location of your apiary, how close the proximity of neighbors you might have. And so all of these kind of factors come into play when you're looking at choosing a bee if you're actually going to be buying bees. Buck fast, gentle, quick to build up in spring, great honey producer, and very hygienic. So we've seen, again, I mentioned earlier the idea that honeybees are not native to California or the US, right? So there are some bees that over the years have made their way here, European bees back in the 1700s. And now, we think of them as native, although they weren't initially. And I also have heard people can have concern about the idea that, oh, you're keeping honeybees near this pollinator garden, like they're going to compete with the native insects, right? Like all the mason bees are all going to leave, or the butterflies are all going to leave. Um, Last time I heard, I'm sure there's data that exists on this somewhere, that's not the case. That the native honeybees, or the native bees, excuse me, and the imported, typically Italian or honeybee, there's not a negative kind of competition there that happens. So they can coexist in pollinator gardens without a problem. So here we're learning about this kind of hybrid bees that comes over later, like not the Italian that came over in 1700s, but later in the 1900s, from Africa, coming up through Brazil. There's cross, races that happen, that then makes it up into the United States. And so in the past, and there's some reference on these slides, I thought they were moving away from the term Africanized bee. We've used the term locally defensive. But the idea is they're just, you think about a dog, right? Sorry, I have dogs. You have the cute little dog you carry around, and it might bark, but like it's not probably going to go like bite somebody or fend off an attacker, right? Like if somebody tries to break into your house, maybe they're really loud, right? But that might be the extent of it. You might have a different type of dog, maybe a big dog or a medium-sized dog, and if somebody walks in the door, they're going to bite that person, right? And so, and maybe they'll bark, maybe they don't, but they're much more defensive in that way. And so when kids come over to your house, you're like, hey, don't pet the dog, right? Because the dogs might bite you. So this hybrid bee, or sometimes referred to as Africanized or locally defensive bees, are kind of that scenario, right? These bees are going to be more readily available to attack. And in that sense, when you're walking by a hive, if somebody's mowing your lawn and there's a hive there, if there's an animal close by that happens to be dark, there's a natural defensive mechanism in bees to attack darker things, like they're big predators, bears, honey badgers, right? Those kind of things. And so a lot of times bees, and you'll learn when you're keeping bees not to wear dark colors for that purpose. All bee suits are like white or light colored, right? For that reason. And so you have this more defensive strain of bees that if you're out in the field, you're out in a farm, you've got, public land behind your house for acres and acres. Maybe this is okay if you want to put up with them, because they're going to be more successful inside the hive with potentially with honey production, with fighting other pests. I mentioned a couple animals. We'll learn about other insects later, like the mites and the beetles and the moths. But when it comes down to backyard beekeeping, and there's a house at 150 feet away that way and 100 feet that way, and a neighbor behind me, this can be very dangerous, again, in Southern California, especially because this is more likely to happen because this strain of bee likes the warmer climates, right? So in Northern California, you that are in the room or watching this video, you might not have this issue because there's a natural die-off in winter from wild bees because it gets freezing. And so there's much less likelihood, and this is why we buy queens from the north, because they're going to be a little bit more controlled in how they're mated. I'll pause there. If you have other questions that come up, we can hit those. So here's kind of a map, and again, you're kind of seeing this southern affected area because of the warmer temperatures of this strain of bee that's going to be more defensive. Some actual specific counties listed out as known areas too. I'm just taking a quick scroll through the chat too. Oh, interesting. Studying bee. I'm just reading through your earlier chat, Corey. A master's in psychology, concentration in behavioral health in humans. Now study bee behavior. That's awesome. Yeah, it's been kind of cool to learn. Our local, I'm here in Orange County, Southern California. In Riverside, there's UC Riverside. They have a huge bee study. Obviously, Davis is on the north, but I didn't know so many programs on the UC side had more specific like entomology or bee study programs. In Riverside, they even do like insemination on queens and stuff there for study and research. Super interesting. Some good traits. I was mentioning this already a little bit with the Africanized or defensive strains. Um, there's some work being done, right? The idea that can we capture the good traits and leave some of the bad traits, right? Because they're definitely good at some things. Strong work ethic, high honey production, and they're more resistant to diseases. I mentioned to pests as well. So, is there any way to lower that aggressiveness? I don't know. They're working on it. And we talked about this a little bit already, but here's some of those things. I'll just recap. When we're looking at bees, again, if you're going to pick your bees or things to be looking for when you're managing your bees, how gentle are they? Are they productive? Are they producing? Disease tolerant? Are they kicking out dead bees when they're sick? And how will they react in the winter? Um, this comes with time. Since many of you are in here already keeping bees, be patient with yourself. Like I said, the best of the best still loses colonies. The best of the best will still have a colony swarm. You can't foresee or react sometimes quick enough to stop all of the bad stuff that could happen, right? And I think in the back of my mind, what helps me stay sane in working with bees is that like the bees don't need us, right? Because you choose to have a box in your backyard that bees live in, they don't need you. Like they're going to figure it out or they're going to leave, right? And so in a lot of ways, I look at beekeeping as how do how do I keep those bees as happy as possible in that box? Because if they're not happy, they're just going to go leave and find somewhere else to live, right? And so, and sometimes I just don't know, or I won't know, or like I said, I won't be able to react quick enough when I see something to be able to save those bees in my box in my backyard. Maybe them leaving will actually perpetuate those survival better than in my box, right? And I can try again next season, or go pick up another swarm another time. So, um, just some kind of like some mindfulness, I guess, as you go into this uh, possible hobby or possible industry, and you're keeping bees or learning about bees. Speaking of keeping bees in your backyard, we're going to look at a couple different city codes. Make sure that if you're stepping into this realm and you don't have bees yet, or even if you have bees, research what you have to do for this, and it varies. And so it's city by city, sometimes county by county. I happen to live in between cities. I'm in an unincorporated area, which sometimes is good, but sometimes it's more restrictive because now we have to follow rules, what the county says, of the multiple surrounding cities and not just do what we want. And so some cities, some counties do prohibit or some restrict beekeeping and having bees on your property. Some of those criteria, and there's a list, right? A couple here. How close those bees can be to your property line, how close those bees can be to a neighbor's structure. Maybe the zoning, like if you're in a R1 residential, like what you'd think of as a normal house type setup. But sometimes houses have like R2 or R3 or might allow multiple units, which could mean more dense populations. It could mean more rural or more agricultural potentially. So it really does come out really case by case when you're looking at the different cities. And some cities just don't say anything, right? And so you're like, hey, there's nothing I can find. I'm going to go keep the bees. In general, though, from my experience, you want to check first. And it won't necessarily help you with your city, but you can also register your bees with the state so that there is some sort of record that somebody knows that you have bees on your property. You're supposed to do that in those cities that tell you. But also, where was I going with that? If it's a nuisance, right? If your neighbor, even if your city says you can have bees, but your neighbor goes outside to do some gardening or walk the dog and they get bumped or they get stung, um, there's going to be, there's a complaint that could come. Like there's a likelihood that you'll have to move those bees. So there's usually in most city codes something that refers to like a nuisance. So even if you're allowed and you're doing it good, if the neighbor's going to complain, if you're not in good with your neighbor, you could have issues in the future still. So one example would be the city of Irvine. Just a couple years ago, a local club, actually the club I'm participating in, they moved forward in working with the city to try to adopt some rules. And so they were able to sign something over with very specific criteria I looked it up last night. I don't think I ever looked it up. It's like a 3-page application with like 6 or 7 steps. And so some cities might say, yeah, you can have 2 hives. Some say, yes, you can have 2 hives, but here's the process, right? Which, I mean, it looks like, it doesn't look like it's hard, but it's not like, I'm going to go pick up a swarm and put it in my backyard right now. One of the cool things to think about, there are different kind of proactive ways that you can keep bees in your backyard. And one way we see kind of this example picture, if you have some sort of barrier on the opening side of your hive, this forces the bees to fly up, right? So if you haven't heard this yet, on the front side of your hive that's your landing strip for your bees. If there is nothing in front of that hive, they are going to use as much space as they want to be able to kind of fly in, if you will, and come into the front of that hive. But if there's a barrier in front of that hive, it forces them to go out of the hive and up, or when they're coming back, to come down into the hive. So this is super helpful when you have in a neighborhood, when you have neighbors, to kind of force, especially on a property line, force the bees to go up and out, as opposed to having a long runway. Again, here's just another reference to another code or city ordinance for the space between a hive and another dwelling. And we have other options or certain requirements that might be named, which we know are a good practice, but might be named in these rules from the city, like having a water source, certain minimum spaces between hives or between property lines or between properties. So here's some of the things that we would want to expect to have when managing bees, particularly backyard scenarios. Hives where you can remove the frames. Now, there are different types of hives out there, and if you do any YouTube videos or watch any history of beekeeping, you'll see those old skeps, right? Those kind of cone-looking that are made with like some sort of wheat, grass or something, right? That are woven together. So in our modern day beekeeping, we wouldn't want to use those, although some people might think it's cool. It minimizes your ability to manage the bees, right? So when you have removable frames, and that's why we see the square boxes as being kind of the standard, it allows you to go in, pick up the frame, look at both sides of that frame, and look for things that, again, trying to keep those bees as happy as possible in that box. Do they have enough food? Is there enough nectar? Is there enough pollen? Is there enough bee bread for baby bees? Is the queen in there? Is there signs of the queen in there? We can't spot the queen, but we see eggs. How are the eggs laying? Is there, royal jelly in the bottom of that egg cell? All these little things are, what do the wax caps look like on top of that frame? How are the bees acting when I pick it up? Right. And so if they're just in a box and you can't get in there, like I've seen swarms coming into like a mulching box, or you have like one of those old school skeps. It's like you can't just pick that up and see what's going on, and we need to know what's going on, particularly in Southern California because of the reasons I've mentioned. We need to have some source of water for the bees. There's a reference here on the slide in a good location, so that can mean different things that we can talk more about. And again, we have to watch out for this aggressive behavior, more common in the South, but I'm sure it can happen in the North too. And when this behavior happens, we need to look to requeen, maybe split the hive. And unfortunately, I've heard of examples where you might just have to kill part of the hive. And so again, I come at beekeeping really practical, and I'm sharing sometimes sciencey stuff here. But logistically, if you go out into a hive and there's thousands of bees that are stinging your animals or your kids, and you go outside in that environment, you have to react, right? I've got a buddy here locally who was called out to a school, and the school had bees that were stinging kids at recess, and they were able to track it back and find where the bees were coming from, somebody's backyard. I mean, there's liability there, right? Like, how do you react in that scenario? So we have to try to catch that early on before it gets bad, where people are getting hurt, animals are getting hurt. Here's a general guideline. Again, depending on your scenario, if you're in the middle of the forest, and nobody's around you, how many can you have? Some cities, since we're talking about, city codes and that kind of thing, the rules we have to follow in our homes, some might specify those number of colonies, but this is just a general guideline. In a dense city, you think like, oh, well, there's tons of flowers and fruit trees, and they're blossoming all year round, sometimes in Southern California. So this is really, again, kind of just an idea of space needs. I'm going to hit, I think, this one more section, and then we'll take our break. So our apiary location. We'll give you some tips here. Maybe in your backyard, right? You're just thinking, you're here in this room, I have this hive in the back. Like, I'm committed at this point, right? But sometimes, even the location, like even in your backyard, might make a difference with your bees. And sometimes there's the best case scenario, and then there's the, hey, this is what I have, and this is what I'm going to have to do, right? You might not have a choice in some of this. So come in here. We're going to talk about some ideals in the apiary location. And then again, if you have questions, we can also maybe address those too. So this might seem like a no-brainer, right? Easy access. But sometimes you think about in your backyard, you're like, I want to put the bees over here because it's going to be out of the way. This isn't an area where the animals go. This isn't an area where the kids go. It's the farthest away from the neighbor. Or maybe I have to measure 100 feet and this is the only corner they can go in. But access is super important. You're going to need to be able to walk up. You're going to have equipment. You're going to have a smoker that gets hot, potential fire, danger there. So are we able to manage the weeds that are around the hive? When there's more weeds, there's more chance of pests and animals that can negatively affect your hive. So access is important. Preparing the area can be important, right? If it is a heavily grassed area, maybe you put down pavers or put down gravel or something to limit the grass growth. Because once those bees are in there, and some of these hives in this picture, I mean, I have colleagues that would say, like, never let your hive get that big. Because if you have to go out there and it's that huge of a colony and you're weed whacking around the base of that hive, they might get mad, especially if you're paying somebody to do that work. So yeah, access is an important thing to keep in mind. Water is also a killer of bees, and not just water like them drowning. Rob, I see your hand. But water potentially coming into the hive, but also a wet environment around. Because again, sometimes wet, you've got other issues that come up, like more weeds or potentially mold or other things that can negatively affect the bees. So drainage is good, particularly on and in the hive itself, but it's also something to keep in mind around the area of the hives. A water source, something where we'll see a picture here in a little bit, but some way that they can get water. The bees need water. They use that water not only to drink, but also to affect the climate inside the hive. And so when it's hot out, water can come in to the hive to help cool things down. A bit of shade can be helpful, especially in my area. I'm thinking high desert, where it's just hot a lot of the year. Shade can be helpful, right? Because if that hive is over, 95, 96, 97, 98, you have a 110-degree day outside, like those bees have to work really, really hard to keep the temp down inside that hive. And so, some shade might be necessary. On the flip, if you're in a wet, you live close to the ocean, you're in the Bay Area, right? You're going to soak up every bit of sun you can get, right? You don't want to be keeping moisture trapped down, if you can keep the hives out a little bit more in an open area. If you're in a windy area, this is also really important. If it's super windy, the bees don't come out. And so in a windy area, some sort of windbreak or a block for the hives, to help protect them from that force, is very helpful. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I had a question that trying to connect the dots from the last slide to this slide in terms of what constitutes a hive. Is the picture we're currently looking at, is that one hive, four hives, or like 15 hives, or can you tell from looking at the picture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. And people will use that word interchangeably, right? So I've kind of used it interchangeably as well. So I'll say what we're looking at in this picture is 4 separate colonies, right? So in each one of these stacks is a family of bees. In each one of these stacks is only one queen, and then the workers and the drones. We saw those casts earlier. But that being said, people will call them hives. People will refer to the actual box itself as a hive. So that word is it is kind of ambiguous in that sense. So when trying to be clear, I would say that these are 4 colonies, but some people would say 4 hives. Yeah. So colony hive can be used interchangeably. Really good question. And we'll talk about these different boxes too a little bit later, and why I might suggest that this can be a problem. I'll just throw it out there because again, we're looking at practical stuff today, right? So we look at this, and the first thing I think of is how in the world I'm 6'5", about 200 pounds, and I'm pretty active. So I could probably get up here and take off this rock or take off a strap and take off the. But a lot of the people and women that I work with, when we beekeeping, they're like 5'5". There's no way in the world you'd be able to get on top of this thing to move these boxes safely. And when this box is full of honey, it's like 100 pounds. It's heavy. And so when a hive gets this big, I see a little bit of red flag there. Also, when a colony gets this big, they can be more difficult to handle. More frames like when you're doing an inspection on this thing, like you're supposed to be in the box like less than 10 minutes. Like how in the world can you get through that many frames that quickly, right? Or maybe from what I'm seeing, 1, 2, maybe 3 boxes of bees, and maybe 1, 2, or 3 honey supers. Maybe this is just an area that collects a ton of nectar, so the bees are making a ton of honey. But this is still really big. So I want you just to see this just as a reference. I'm not saying it's bad. Again, everybody has a different opinion. But when you look at this, don't think that like I would not suggest you have this in your backyard. It's just too big. All right, I'll keep going on. So we see a different facing as well. So remember that box has 1 opening on the front. All other sides of that box should be sealed up. Cracks, corners, top, bottom should be all sealed up. They're only coming in and out of 1 side. Not just for the bees' sake, but for potential predators and potential other bees coming in. They have to have a defendable space at the front of that box. And sometimes in the years, we actually block some of that space. They still can come in and out, but we want to make it even smaller to try to limit the possibility of robbing or other colonies of bees coming into that hive. And so, again, looking at some ideals here, east or southwest, east or southeast, thinking about the sun coming up. Certain as the sun rises from the east. Sorry, Beauty and the Beast always comes to mind. Rises in the east, sets in the west, right? In the winter, that sun dips to the south too, right? So if you're facing east, that means that the bees are getting sun as the sun rises. And the bees need the sun when they're locating pollen, nectar, and their food stores. And so, again, we're talking about ideals. I don't think I've ever had bees at my home facing east. It is what it is, right? They had to go one direction. So we're just talking about ideals here. Again, we're talking about access to the colonies, to the hive boxes. I mentioned some of those boxes being heavy, right? Are you going to be able to pick that up and carry it to where you need to take it? If you're going to be pulling off boxes full of bees or boxes full of honey, we need to think about, having a path. Is the path paved? Is it level? All these can be, challenges when we're managing the hive. We already mentioned the windbreak, a little bit of shade, good ventilation. The box itself should be, now the area could be sloped potentially, right? We already talked about drainage, which can be good. But the box itself and the stand that the boxes are sitting on, really good for them to be level, and not just level, but just slightly tipping forward. Like if you actually had a level with a bubble on it on the box, and some beekeepers carry those things, you want that opening hole to be just slightly downward. So if it rains, water gets into the box. If there's humidity inside that box, that does happen. We want any accumulation of water inside that box to be able to get out the front. If it rains and it's tilted back and that water can gather in the back, that can kill your colony. The bees will not be able to regulate the temperatures with water inside that hive. So we're looking at level, a firm level, with just a slight tilt forward to allow any moisture to get out the front. Here's some pictures. Again, these are just random pictures that were in here. Oh my gosh, you'll also see, and we can talk, it might be the second or third section when we talk about actual woodenware and styles. You'll see boxes, and sometimes you're like, what kind of box is that? This setup, it looks like it has siding on it. Does it come apart? I don't know. I have questions. Um, but you'll see, you can be in a garden, right? My wife and I, and one of the reasons that we wanted to start beekeeping years ago was to be able to help pollinate our own plants and trees and stuff. So we have a garden in the front, garden boxes and stuff. Our bees have always been in the back. Um, we went on a 6-month trip last year, and my bees are not in my house anymore, right now at least. But one of the things we noticed is that even without the bees in our backyard, we still have a ton of bees in the garden. And so I think we always assumed like, oh, those bees in the front yard, they're our bees, right? But there's a ton of bees just all over the place. And so your bee boxes don't have to be in your garden. They're going to forage on whatever they can, within the, first mile or 2 mile radius. Um, but if you have a garden, that's something to keep in mind. Um, Again, with those other factors, proximity of neighbors, kids, animals, that kind of thing. Some people might put up some sort of barriers. You'll see this, like maybe this was a bad neighbor situation. Some people also try to hide their hives as much as possible. Part of my house has a flat roof, and for a while I was like, I could have 30 hives up here. And then every beekeeper I talked to said, do not put your bees on the roof. Because then when any neighbor, a neighbor's kid a block away gets stung, they're like, oh yeah, that house has bees. And you become the problem, right? It's not the random bee, that it's your bee that stung that kid, right? So some people want to kind of encapsulate or again kind of control the flow of where those bees are going. So in this setup, right, these bees are probably coming out and up over this fence, um, and so we can kind of control that flight path a little bit. Some areas, again, screened areas, that screen has to be really tight. It's like 1/8 of an inch or less, right, to actually keep the bees in. Or we look at this scenario here. This likely is here's either a wind break and or a break to help the bees go up. We have this screened box, but this is not keeping the bees in, right? This looks like a chicken wire or some sort of open wire. You can see openings in that wire. This is to help protect from predators, right? So if you have a scenario or a geographical location where there's, badgers, skunks, raccoons, rats, you may need to actively seek to try to block out predators from those bees. Bears, of course. So water sources. Here's an important thing for water sources. You'll see up in this bucket, the bees will kind of go in on the edge, and at least this bucket has an angled edge, right? It's not like a feeding trough where you'd think of it like a vertical wall. So the bees are able to kind of grab and hold on and get down in there to drink. But almost every scenario, you want to have some sort of thing, rocks, gravel, corks, for the bees to land on and stand on. Bees are horrible swimmers. They drown pretty quick. And so with your water source, you want to make sure, one, that there's water there, and they'll fly to the neighbor's pool to get water. And for some reason, they seem to like chlorinated water. They're kind of drawn to it, but they'll drown quick in the pool, right? We've all seen bees in a pool. We want to have some sort of surface for them to land on, to stand on, to keep out of the water itself. Just some other examples of pictures. I'm looking to see if there's anything unique out of these. I see access issues with this guy. Although the protection, it might be nice from rain on this setup. I don't know how you would get under there to lift those boxes up and out. Again, with them being heavy, like a lot of times you want you want to be able to get your body close to that box, because sometimes you need to leverage your weight. Like I'm trying to like hold my hands, right? If you're keeping that box like towards your chest, right? Because holding out a box full of bees or full of honey, like it's heavy, and you can't do that for very long. This looks like a good setup. Yeah, rain is a big deal. Like here, because it doesn't rain a lot, but when it does, it can dump. I would like throw plywood on top of my hives just to kind of shelter them a little bit from the rain. This white one, picket fence, looks really nice, right? Only aesthetic. Like this isn't going to help the bees at all. Maybe it gives a visual for people walking by potentially. Like, oh, there's bees right there. Stay away. But cool, cool. I'm just, walking through some of the photos with you. Consider your neighbors. Again, placement, out of sight, out of mind. I mentioned this, right? With you don't want to put bees on top of your roof. You want to keep them pretty much out of the way if possible. Even if you're following the rules, right? Even if it's legal and you're following the rules and you're the most awesome beekeeper ever, if a ton of people see your bees, like you become, oh, that's they're bees, stung my kid. Controlling the access is important. You don't want your bees in an area where there's like, a dozen kids running by. You want to be able to have that area somewhat set aside or controlled at least. Again, we talked about the position of the opening. The bees are coming in and out using that as their landing path. So we don't want to put that opening facing a pool or facing, the playground. We want to angle that towards maybe a wall or towards an area where there's no neighbors, or if we have to erect some sort of barrier to force them to fly up. Keep that in mind. And it doesn't have to be solid either. It could just be a hedge. It could be a plant of some sort. Anything that's going to block them from flying, right, they're gonna have to fly around it. Is the idea. And then also education is great. So as you learn, as you talk to neighbors, as you take them some honey, and it's the best honey they've ever tasted in the world, you're like, yeah, these came from my bees, and here's why. And like to be able to engage people and educate them on bees. A lot of people are afraid of bees, and some people. We just found out. I was at a nature group with some friends and their kids, and little girl, she'd been stung before out of the blue. This hike, she got stung and she had anaphylactic. We had to get her to the urgent care, EpiPen, the whole deal. And she had never experienced it before. So there's a reason that people can be afraid of bees, right? I hate getting stung. I hate it. And I've never been stung while managing bees, like in my suit and doing the job, right? But outside, you get stung, and it's still there's still a reaction to that pain, right? And so just keep that in mind when you're talking to people. I've learned that some people are really interested. I've had people actually ask about education of bees because they're afraid of bees. They're like, I'm deathly afraid of bees. I want to learn more about them. I'm like, oh, that's kind of impressive, right? But you just never know where people are coming from when you're talking about that. So just keep education in mind. Think of yourself as a helper, helping them understand. And sometimes learning some of these basic facts, like, oh yeah, did you know that all those bees in that hive are girls? It's the lazy boys that are in there that steal the food. Things you don't think about and people don't know about until you tell them, right? All right, thanks for hanging in there. We're gonna take a quick break. Let's do a 10-minute. My phone says 10:08. So let's go 10:18. Grab some coffee, go to the bathroom, water, whatever you need to do, and we'll get started back up in just a minute. Those chats. Awesome. Welcome back. Thanks for that little break. Hopefully, feel a little rejuvenated, and my monotonous talking isn't getting to you. So looking through the chat, Corey, I saw some comments you made about using pea gravel, like preparing the land around where the hives are. I think that's great. I think a lot of times, as we heard earlier, right? Oh, I got this hive, or somebody brought the hive over and then they disappeared, or sometimes you go into this and you're like, what am I doing? I don't know. It's survival at that point, right? So if you can come back and as you're learning about this and thinking about maybe different areas or if the bees need to move, being able to prepare the area is pretty important. I'll make a quick comment too about that. If you're going to be moving your hive, it's a trip. You need to move them very incrementally. So if you move the hive over, they say like a couple feet at a time. Move it over a couple feet, wait a couple days, move it over a couple, wait. Because the bees know um, where their house is, right? Think about if you were to drive home, you're driving down your street and you pull up to your house and it's gone. And you're like, hey, where's my house? Wait, is that it? 2 doors down? Like the bees, when they know where their house is, right? So when you move it, they're going to come back to the spot where it was. And so if you move it too far too quickly, they're going to go back to the old spot and they may not ever find it back, even if it's on the other side of your yard. It's kind of weird to think about. But so if you do need to move your bees, prepare the area where you're going, but then move them incrementally and slowly. Usually at night when the bees are dormant. Um, And so also when the worker bees are out flying around collecting nectar, you don't want them to come back into a moved house. And so usually at nighttime, move them incrementally. Corey, you mentioned yourself being 5'3". When we talk about some of the woodenware and the equipment, I'll make some comments about this too regarding your size, your weight limits, maybe physical challenges that you might have in carrying heavy weights. There's some ways that we can kind of work around those challenges with the equipment that you're using. There was a question that came through in the chat like, hey, where do I find if bees are okay in this city? So it really comes down to city by city. Most cities have their documents, their like zoning and code requirements published online. Most of them do. A lot of those will have search functions. And so you're looking and searching for words like beekeeping, apiary, bees, that kind of thing. Um, if you can't find those, the city might just be silent. They might not mention it at all. So sometimes it takes a little bit of extra digging. And then sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to make a phone call because then I'm going to draw a red flag. But asking your local club could also help too, because a lot of the local clubs are tied into those, more specific geographical areas. How far are the water source from the hive? I would say in your yard. And particularly if you have a neighbor that has a pool, like I have a neighbor that has a pool on my south side. So I made sure that I had a really attractive water source, easy access water source in between the hives and that neighbor's wall. And so maybe closer to the hive, they'll be more likely to hit that water than to be drowning in the neighbor's pool and to bug the neighbor. So it doesn't have to be like right next to the hive, but within your yard should be sufficient. The bees are going to pick up water wherever they can get it, whenever they need it. But the idea that you have something there for them if they need it is helpful. I've heard people sometimes, the movement of water, a lot of times, and we're going to be branching into plants here in the next section. UC has a whole master gardener program, which I haven't done. But whenever I beekeep with those largely ladies, I haven't met any men gardeners, but master gardeners. But the ladies, they're talking about all sorts of plants that can go in the water, plants that can go next to the water, and be helpful for the bees and available for them too. So yeah, it's super super interesting to jump into that stuff. So the water and what you put in that water, right? It could be a floating plant, whatever that is, to help the bees be able to land on to drink safely. We have a list. Oh, Keon, thank you so much. There's a list of the regulations city by city. Perfect. Oh, that's a huge asset. Yeah, and again, camp is awesome. Huge resource. All right, let's jump back into the presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about plants. Again, I am not a. Oh, I didn't get to mention this. When I was in camp, one of the other students in camp said, "Hey, I want to do this project for kids, and I want to do a videotaped thing so I can show them video and talk about it." And so she came to my backyard, and this is my daughter. She's 12 now and probably a foot taller than this, but uh, she was super cute out there in her bee suit. So she's been able to keep bees with me, experience that together, which has been cool.
I don't have any screen sharing going on about other people. I just see the video, the people's faces.
Thank you so much for letting me know that. I got to go in the right order here. Share screen, that guy. Then presentation mode. Then presenter view. All right, we good now?
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate letting me know. Yeah, so this was yeah, so I think it's also cool too, just from the education's perspective, right? Whether it's your neighbor, your kids' friends, your grandkids, whatever it is, right? They get so fascinated with this stuff because they see it and they're around it, but you don't really know, right? Until you actually get to jump in. So I'm going to click through here a little quickly. I apologize. But I don't want to mess up my view now that I finally got the thing. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about plants. Again, I'm not sciencey and I'm super practical and I do grow some food. So I'm familiar with those plants that grow well here. And I can mention a couple that the bees have loved. But we're going to talk a little bit in general about some other plants. Our climates here in California are kind of unique, right? And so we might think of normal plants that we see and native plants that we see, but when you jump into this world of pollination and if you want to add more diversity into your apiary or into your property, there's a lot of other options that you might not come across, right? And I'm sure the person that wrote this slide is from like the master gardeners. So we have this climate that's similar to others where we might be able to bring in other plants that are not necessarily common here. We do have some natives that are good. Poppies are awesome. We just had a poppy pop up in our yard, which is awesome to see. They're beautiful. Going on hikes and stuff locally too. I love on a hike and you go under a tree and it looks really green, right? You don't even see buds or flowers, but you can hear the buzz and you just that low hum. And if you start looking up, like the dogwood's one of those examples, when it blooms, like you'll hit the tops will bloom and the bees will just get attracted to it immediately. It's cool to see those, in normal wildlife around us. Again, I'll let you read these. I don't have much added input on the flowers, unfortunately. I've found one of the plants I always try to have somewhere in my garden or around my house. It's called, how I buy it, it's called a purple leaf basil, I think. It's a basil plant, but it grows these purple flowers and the bees love them. Um, there's also a couple sages that we have that flower that the bees love. And then, for you and you're planting stuff on your own property, you're like, okay, am I going to do this just for the bees? Are they beautiful as well? Am I going to try to like grow food and the bees are pollinating it, but they also are attracted to the flowers? Where do I put those flowers in relation to the food or the fruit trees? Right? These are all the little different considerations you can think about. For me, this is like next level, right? Your bees are going to find food. Um, and hopefully in your local area there's enough food for them to find, otherwise you're going to have to feed them. So this is important, but you want to make sure your bees are happy, I think, first. Second, how are we going to help supplement and keep them even more happy on the property? So you can see a lot of different, what we're seeing here, different flowers. And what's really interesting when you start thinking about the bees is how they collect that nectar and how they pollinate. And so when you start seeing these flowers, I see these ones that are very open and they have the long the red, bits that a bee can just grab on the tip, right, and grab that stuff. We'll see some examples of some plants that are actually more difficult for them to pollinate and access. But Rob, go ahead.
If you live in an area where you see natural hives occurring, like in trees and just lots of bees around, generally speaking, like, is it safe to assume there's enough food around for another hive?
Yeah, and if you look at a map too, like for kicks, if you're like, oh man, how many hives can I have? I did this kind of research a little bit for the college at one point, and I did like a Google map. And there's in Google Map, there's like a measuring tool in there, which I hadn't used before that point, but you can actually measure out distance from your pin, right? And so if you draw a radius, one of the cool things I noticed is like we don't think about it, but the bees will fly up to 5 miles, right? So obviously closer is a little bit easier for them. But if we're going out a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, and I'm seeing like 4 parks, or there's like, oh, here's a farmland, or like when you look at it geographically, aerial view of that or topographical view, um, sometimes you can pick that up too, and you'll see like, oh, here's a whole neighborhood of homes. Like homes usually do a pretty good job of having some sort of plants, right, that are going to bloom and have flowers. But at the end of the day, um, when the bees are there and they're in your backyard, that's one of the things that you're looking for when you're managing them and you're pulling the frames. And if even if there's a ton of flowers, but then we get into summer and a lot of those flowers die or the natural flowers die off, right? Um, they will have to look at feeding. And so in your next steps in education into camp, right, you'll learn more about that management, when to feed, how to feed. So if we can shorten that feeding time, that's best, right? If the bees can just get it naturally, because that's money out of pocket. Basically, you're buying 50-pound bags of sugar to supplement their feed in those harsher times. Fruit trees. Something interesting I learned. My wife and I were visiting a winery, and I was watching the machinery go through, and I'm like, I don't see any bees. So not all fruit and food plants need pollination, but a large percentage do. So like grapes don't actually need bee pollination. Um, but for our own food production, right? We think about we're here in California. I think we're the right now the fifth largest economy in the world. So if California was its own nation, we'd be fifth largest as far as like gross domestic product goes. And we create a ton of food here for the world. And so bees are a huge part of our life in California. And likely you've heard about the almond trees. You know, people ship bees into the almonds um, from all over the nation uh, because those almond trees are so dense. And I just talked about the distance of flight, right? Max 5 miles. When you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of acres of almonds, bees aren't coming in from outside of the almonds to come pollinate the middle of the almonds. They need to bring the bees to the almonds. And so it's a huge time of year pollination. Unfortunately, from what I've heard, that honey does not taste good. Um, but when the bees build up honey, and even in the almond fields, they'll use that honey to feed back to the bees at a later point. Um, but yeah, so I mean, a lot of our plants, a lot of our food need this pollination. That's what we'll talk about next. So you'll see this largely orange dust, but it can be a lot of different colors. I've seen all sorts of different shades of pinks and reds and orange and yellow and white pollen coming back from the bees. And they don't look quite this messy when they're coming into the hive. Like this is kind of a cool picture because they just look totally dusted, right? But they'll pack this pollen onto their legs. We'll see another photo in just a minute. But their body is made for this, right? The little hairs on their body actually collects to this. The pollen collects to the hair on their bodies, and then they're kind of managing it to take it back into the hive. Just kind of a not only is it important, you know, for the bees themselves, right? They're collecting the pollen, they're collecting the nectars, but then that pollen is transferring right for other plants, allowing for those plants to then grow more food, allowing those plants to be food for us and for animals. So it's a hugely important thing, obviously. Um, Here's a picture of the bee with the pollen pack on there. We call them pollen pants. Because when they fly in, you can just, it's so obvious that it's just stuck on their back leg right there. So they pack it on there. And when they bring it back into the hive, they pack it into cells and that ferments into basically the protein source. So we think about nectar being a carbohydrate, a sugar, right? Source for the bees. Pollen is their protein. And that is needed to feed the baby bees in the hive. Some people, so kind of a pause on the sciencey kind of practical stuff, but like kind of the theoretical here. So like we talked earlier about people using propolis and collecting propolis from hives to use for human use. Obviously, honey is a big one that we want to pull out and use. Again, with the mindset of keeping the bees as happy as possible in that hive, I never want to be in a position where I'm taking their own honey. Like I want to take the extra honey that maybe they won't need. Maybe I feed that back to them in the winter, or I'm going to have to buy sugar to feed back to them in the winter. But I don't want to take out honey that they're going to need for their own food. That kind of defeats the purpose of having happy bees. Pollen is another one of those things where there are traps actually that when the bees come back into the hive, it's kind of like a comb, if you can imagine, where the bees pass the comb and it pulls that pollen off of their legs. And so people do, and you can buy pollen in the stores, right? And that's how they get it. They're getting it off of the legs of bees through a collection tray in the hive. And so there's, you know, potentially, you know, natural positive benefits you can get from, I think mostly people eat it, but from pollen as well. One of those other products that can come out of the hive when you're beekeeping. Some flowers, like we were just talking about, like are super easy. The pollen, the nectar, like right on top of that flower, super easy to access. Some are a little bit harder. You'll see this tube-shaped flower where the bees actually having to like totally dive into the whole flower to get the stuff. So these are more difficult. Again, for me, practical beekeeping. When I'm looking at plants, I'm thinking like, yeah, obviously I want to keep the bees happy, but I want to plant a plant that I'm either going to be able to eat or that looks pretty as well. And so this is just another little thing to keep in mind, right? Or is it going to be easy for them to pollinate? Is it going to allow them an easy food source when they need protein for the hive. Do am I benefiting on my helm? I'm buying it, I'm watering it, right? Like I want it to be as most the most functional as possible. But just another thing to keep in mind how easy it might be to pollinate. Just a quick glimpse at some of the things that need pollination. So many of our crops do. And I mentioned almonds. This is what it could look like when they're bringing bees into the almonds. It's crazy. So that people will send hundreds, thousands of hives from out of state into California every year to pollinate those trees. So it's important. Oh, and then without bees, unfortunately, like I've said, some of our plants that we've grown in the front yard, even it's like, why are these squashes not growing? They have like a little bit of a trumpeted flower. And it's like, are the bees just busy on other plants? Like, why are they not pollinating these ones? But this is what, if there's no bees, right, and that pollination is needed for that tree, that plant, we have to people have to do it. And so you're taking, female, male flowers and you're dusting them and spreading the pollen from flower to flower, which sounds exhausting, right? The little bees do it all the time. Before I move forward, just take a quick breath. Any questions, comments? Any of you master gardeners? I saw a couple heads nod when I mentioned it. Couple chats. Does a metal mice guard remove pollen from the bee entering the hive? Good question. I don't know that there's, how can I say this? The tools and the comb that I mentioned that are created to pull pollen off or collect pollen is pretty specific. So I would say if you have some sort of block or guard or something in your hive for another reason, it probably wouldn't affect the pollen, I would imagine. If it were to fall off, um, and you have a normal hive setup where they're just coming into the hive in the bottom opening, the other bees could probably grab it and bring it in or something. The pollen, sorry, the name is escaping me, but that pollen collection device, the comb, the brush, whatever it's called.
Pollen trap. You got it.
Say it again.
Pollen trap.
Pollen trap. There you go.
Yeah.
Super specific, right? So for the bee to be able to get through it, but then to knock the pollen off of their leg, like it's a super specific spacing and material. So I don't think it would happen necessarily accidentally. 13 raised garden beds. Awesome. Yeah, I've got 4 in the front. It's like its own job taking care of gardens for sure. So not a master gardener, but you're active gardening. It's awesome. Last year experience from Pablo, nectar dearth in Sacramento. Yeah, late August. August is a tough one, right? We're going to get super hot. There's not a lot of rain. And unless you have like neighborhoods that are managing gardens, that natural supply of nectar and pollen usually dies off. The technical term for that is called a dearth, where there's just an absence of food for the bees. Yeah, and that is more likely for robbing to happen, right? So as the bees get desperate for more food, those bees are looking wherever they can get it, right? So if your hive in your backyard has a honey store in there or a sugar source that you're feeding your bees, other bees are going to smell that. And they're more likely going to try to come and take it from your hive. Bees ate almost all their honey. Yeah, so you'll see, and we'll talk a little bit about this with equipment, but there's a lot of different feeding methods or feeding tools that are available. Some are super easy to access, where the honey is at the front of the hive, on the exterior of the hive, like a mason jar upside down with holes in the bottom of it. But those are more likely to get robbed from because it's right at the opening. There are a lot of commercial guys use top feeders where that's easy to access and you're flipping over a container of simple syrup into the top of the hive. But there's just, again, a lot of pros and cons, a lot of different opinions. There's some called frame feeders where you actually have to open the hive and then you're putting in a plastic container that is the width and length of a frame that you're filling. It's a basin that holds simple syrup inside the hive. And I've also seen, I have a couple that I tried where it's actually a top. It's the width and depth of the box. And you have to open the top, but you're opening the top into this other basin of simple syrup that holds it on the top and the bees can get it from underneath. So there's all sorts of different ways of feeding. In the winter, I know some seasons in the north have to put in other types of feed as well. We were just talking about dearth in the middle of summer, but in winter the bees need food too, right? So sometimes there's different ways to feed for that long winter as well. It's pouring. Should I check the hive tomorrow for accumulating water? I would say don't stress too much about accumulating water, but keep it in mind. And for me, I think on the front end, making sure your setup is solid, your hive is level, again, just leaning forward. If that's consistent and it's not squishy dirt and the hive isn't adjusting or sinking, you should be good. But in your next inspection, I would say, Kevin, you asked about the water accumulation. Just peek down in the bottom. When you take out a hive, maybe out of that bottom box, just peek in the back. Just make sure there's not water collecting in there. If there is water in there, you mentioned asking if you could dry it. What I would suggest is just really make sure that that pitch is leaning forward. Getting in there with a towel and the bees, you'd have to move all 10 frames out of the box. Like that's a lot of movement and trauma for the bees. I would say if there is water in there, just make sure you're tilting the right way to allow it to drain out. And then the bees with with their fanning, when they fan their wings, they'll be able to clear it out ideally. I haven't been successful in finding a host to put a hive. I've signed up to be dealing with bee clubs and guilds, run ads on Nextdoor. Yeah, if you can't have bees on your property and you're going to keep bees on somebody else's property, I don't have any insight into doing that. I just know that the stories that I've heard, a lot of people that do that will end up like it's inconvenient, right? You have to drive somewhere to go check on a hive or two and then drive somewhere else for a hive or two. The logistics of that are kind of tiring. And so I've heard a lot of stories of people doing that and then they stop showing up to manage. And so if you're going to do that, I would just say, for yourself, right, commit to being active and managing those bees on a weekly, every other week, weekly in the summer basis. And unfortunately, I don't have any insight. I would say if at all possible to reach out to any more rural areas, like even here in Orange County, there are some cities that still have like light farmland use. Or even here in the city, there will be like under the power lines, there's like people that grow trees and grow things, which a lot of those need pollination. So I would say, think a little bit outside the box as opposed to somebody's backyard, maybe looking at other use type properties. Hopefully that'll help. Yeah, and when you're in, I think there was mention to Kevin, you were talking about getting a package yesterday or today. Yeah, you definitely don't want to move those bees in the rain. So keep them covered. Make sure they have food. I'm sure they have like some simple syrup inside the box, or if it's a nuke, I think you mentioned. There's a frame already in there with honey, I'm sure. So they'll have food for the day. I'm sure they're fine. Just try to make sure that water doesn't get in there. Awesome. Cool. So let's keep on moving forward. As other questions come up, keep them coming. So we talked a little bit about beer, about fear with bees. I am drinking tea, by the way. This is not beer this morning. Yeah. So people, there is sometimes just a fear of bees, right? They can hurt us. And so I think, and there's allergies, and sometimes life-threatening allergies. So rightfully so, there's people that are afraid. But we do have to indicate when you're talking to people and when you're educating people, or maybe you're removing a swarm. Like a swarm is usually like the least aggressive, right? Because that swarm is on the move. And when they leave a hive, when they left their last house, they gorge themselves on honey because they don't know when they're going to get their next meal. And so usually they're pretty docile when they're in that swarm environment. But if you've ever seen a swarm and you know nothing about bees, it's kind of trippy. I mean, just talking about thousands of bees in what looks to be like a chaotic movement. And then they all kind of just like, whoop, and then they just gather around that queen on something, a fence, a picnic table, on the side of a car. It's really random where they land. Usually also when they're in that swarm mentality, especially if it's on like the side of a car and it's out in the open, they're not going to stay there long. So if you want to go collect that swarm, or if you have a message on Nextdoor, Facebook, or something, and they're saying, hey, these bees just landed on my car. I understand if you need to get in your car and need to drive somewhere, that can be a super inconvenient, right? But they're probably not going to stay there for more than 24, 48 hours. So if you're getting like an emergency, oh my gosh, there's a huge pile of bees on my front porch, like chances are they're going to be gone in 48 hours. And if they're not gone in 48 hours, then you can say, at that point, they're probably going to start building comb, and they're going to claim that as home, right? So that at that point, you could also then move forward to talking about removal. But yeah, people can be freaked out by it for sure. One of my weirdest removals was inside of a trailer, like a motorhome trailer, right? Where you tow it. There's a little kitchen in there and a bed and stuff. And it was kind of run down on this property. And so like it was open on one side, but the bees actually got into the trailer and into one of the kitchen cabinets inside the trailer. And so every time you'd walk by that trailer, there'd be, a couple hundred bees circling around or coming in or out. And so the family got kind of freaked out by it. It was really interesting removal, but uh, people get nervous, right? When you have that buzzing going on past your head. Also, just as a sign for you all who are going into this, a large indication for me, if I'm walking out on my front porch and I see a bee, and my kids even now too, like they don't freak out. Like, oh, there's a bee on the flower. That bee is really concerned with gathering food. They don't care if I'm standing there, right? But if I'm walking by that plant and I feel a bee like hit me, we call it bumping. That's a really big sign that there's some aggressive bees around. Usually the bees will bump you before they start stinging you, unless they're like super, super aggressive, defensive. And so, yeah, we call it bumping. So keep note of that too. Like if you're walking past somewhere and you're like, what was that? Something just hit me, and there's a bee flying around you, they're warning you. You might want to kind of move out of the area. And another outside of people, and oftentimes when there's a bees on your eave, or people are freaking out again with this kind of this scary scenario of the swarm of bees, people associate the word swarm too with like an attack, but that's not the case, right? The swarm is when they're just moving together. But it can be intimidating. Another big issue for bees is pesticides. Whether you're in neighborhoods, whether you're close to farmland or public land, it's super easy for cities to send out a truck full of poison to spray the sidewalk with poison to kill off any grass that might be growing up in the cracks, right? Unfortunately, when your bee goes to land on that flower next to it, like it can die. Um, Largely, if we're talking about pesticides, when they're bringing that pesticide, if they make it back to the hive, technically it can spread from there. Usually, when I've heard of large loss, though, it's more of like a local thing. Like many bees are visiting plants that have poison. It's not like one bee that got poison and then brought it back and then everybody died. It's like, all of the workers are visiting an area or a plant or a tree or something that has a poison on it, that they're all kind of getting sick and then coming back. So poison and pesticides a big deal, especially in commercial farming, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But yeah, a lot of farms use poison to kill the bugs. And so it can kill bugs, including your bees. Loss of habitat, obviously in our manicured cities, there's less ability for the bees to kind of naturally live. And so again, we have to kind of manage them. I've actually heard of an organization in Northern California that is kind of trying to repopulate the natural bee world. So they'll actually take like trunks of trees and hollow them out and then put them out in the forest, so that it's like giving the bees homes, like readily available homes out there in the forest. We can't do that in Southern California because, again, at some point it's likely that hive will get more and more defensive. But yeah, loss of habitat. So again, I kind of feel like the bees don't need us. They're going to find a home and somewhere to live eventually. And so keep them as happy as possible as you can on your property, and give them somewhere nice to live. Even when they are living on your property, though, we do in this management process, we have to be informed. We have to learn how to diagnose and how to treat different diseases and parasites. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Louis?
Yeah, I was just gonna, on the subject of pesticide, I was gonna call out that one of the advantages to me registering my hives in San Benito County, I don't know if this is the same in other counties, but um, it entitles me to notifications of pesticide spraying because I am in an agricultural city. So that might, you know, one other advantage to registering with our county.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for bringing that up. That is a huge, yeah. And then, Louis, just curious, if you know they're going to be spraying, do you like cover the hives? You block the entrance? What do you do for that day?
I mean, I haven't encountered it yet, but yeah, that was the plan, was to just basically close the entrance of the hive for the day, just to reduce their risk.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, and you sound like you know what you're talking about, but we want to make sure ventilation is available for the bees too, because if they're locked up and they're not getting airflow, they can get really hot. And there's ways to use screen and stuff like that to block the entrance, as opposed to like what we think of as like a shutting a door type of idea. But yeah, so pesticides is a big deal. That registry, I know, as a beginning beekeeper, I got kind of nervous too, and they would talk about it at the club, like, oh, make sure to register your bees. And just immediately, I feel like, oh man, the man is watching, right? Like everybody's gonna know I have bees now. Am I putting myself, am I painting a target on my back? Type of
Yeah,
idea.
I was the same. I fully intended to have pirate bees, but that benefit seems too strong for me not to register them.
Yeah, yeah. And in the years that I had registered bees here at my house, I never had a negative. Like there was nothing ever negative I ever experienced from it. So um, I feel like, shoot, man, when my insurance company knows that there's a trampoline in my backyard because of a Google satellite, like they're probably gonna be able to pick up bee boxes somewhere too. Aerial photography and footage and stuff. So obviously, farmers, I mentioned that already. Use a lot of different chemicals for their crops. There are some that are labeled safe for bees. So, like, if you're in a position where you have to use some sort of protection, maybe you are growing food at your house, that kind of thing. There are some other natural alternatives. One of the ones I know I've used is called neem oil, which helps suffocate bugs on the plant. Um, doesn't hurt the plant though, and it doesn't hurt the bees. But you want to do it at a certain time of day so they're not actively trying to pick it up when you're spraying it. Um, so there's other tools that are out there. If you absolutely have to use some sort of like chemical or poison, um, yeah, it's a couple slides out still. I'll show you a couple, but there's look for labels that say that they're safe. I mean, do as much as you can. Obviously, you don't want to go kill all your bees after you jump into all of this. Keeping in mind too, you might think like, "Oh no, I don't use poison. My neighbor doesn't use poison." But if there's like a city park a half mile, a mile, 2 miles from your house, like that park is probably using poison to manage weeds and manage the grass and stuff. So you just want to keep that in mind. Can't really do much to stop it, right? But when you're managing your bees, you're checking them out. Something to keep in mind. A lot of times we think about this being a collaborative effort. Not all of us live near farmland. I don't live near farmland, but the idea that it kind of has to be a conjoined effort, right? The farmers need the bees, so like you don't, as a farmer, you don't want to kill off the bees, right? Oh, and somebody was mentioning, super interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think about that because I don't have these types of pests, but somebody mentioned lizards and spiders to potentially help manage bugs. Because yeah, mosquitoes, that's another big thing, right? Spraying to kill off the mosquitoes. How do you get from ants being in the hive? Yeah, all these other little pests. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that today, but there's definitely a lot of information from camp about how to protect the hive from other pests. Cool, cool. Well, I love the active conversation in the chat too. It's good. I don't want to. Oh, this is funny too. So, like again, I don't being in the city, I haven't thought of this, right? But there's other ways potentially to weed and to manage those things. Um, I've used like diatomaceous earth too for like my chickens. I've heard people use that for like some sort of bug control too, instead of trying to spray for spiders and that kind of thing. Slugs, those other types of pests. So we could use, fire carefully, of course. Following up on what we just talked about, make sure you're reading the labels. All right. So this gets a bit sciencey, but I'm going to keep it practical for you. At the end of the day, bees have predators too, right? It used to kill me. I would find this like mockingbird that would like sit out, or a towhee like out in my backyard, and I would just see it like a whoop, 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 like right past the hive, like over and over again. I'm like, oh, it's eating my bees. The bees have predators everywhere. And so they can be outside, they can be physical, they can be, the honey badger and the bear and the raccoon and the birds, but they can also be inside. And so some of those things we can control, some of those things we can't, some of those things we can test for, some we can't. But there are different signs that we can look for absolutely when we're managing. There's a question about pesticides being present in the honey. So from my experience and what I've learned, Keon, if I'm way off on this, catch me. From what I've learned, pesticide buildup is more likely to happen in the wax than it is in the honey. So when the bee is bringing back nectar to the hive, and then they're regurgitating it back and forth, and then they're putting it in the cell and they're covering it and it's fermenting. My understanding is that that doesn't come through, it doesn't hold into the honey. And I don't know if that's because honey's amazing and it's naturally antibacterial in its nature, but I have heard, like in this picture that we're seeing on the screen, some of that wax looks pretty dark brown, right? And so my guess is that as wax builds up and is held inside the hive longer and longer, that more and more pesticide can build up in that wax. This is why most people, when they're collecting honey, I'm sorry, yes, when they're collecting honey and cutting the caps off of the honey to pull the honey out of the cells, that clean virgin wax is what's used usually for wax products, especially when you're talking about like makeup products, because it's virgin wax, it's only come out of one set of bees. When that wax is used over and over again, like in the brood area of your boxes, of your hives, that wax will get darker. And so you wouldn't want to scrape that wax off and use that wax for, especially for like wax products for your body.
Yeah.
For a candle or something, I don't know if there's negative consequence, but the idea is you don't want to use the old wax. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly that. Some pesticides can also get into honey and cause health complications for both the bees and humans, but generally way more in wax. And there is a website that UC has that lists all of the pesticides, if you're able to determine which pesticide was applied, and if it's toxic to humans, and if it's toxic to bees. And that's useful because there's a lot of pesticides out there that might mess with the bees, but they don't mess with humans. So it might still be safe to use that wax product or that honey product. So yeah, it's not black and white. And I'll send that website in the recap and also put it in the chat right now.
That's an awesome resource. Thank you. Yeah, and this is where, going down the idea of like farming too, right? Like I get the idea of genetically modified foods. Like if we can modify this food so if it's more protected against bugs or more protected against poisons, but then I think logically or realistically how it functions is now we have this stronger plant and we can spray poison on it to kill the bugs but not kill the plant, but then we're eating that, right? So like there's pros and cons to that too. And so yeah, so when we're looking at bees, obviously the external stuff we can try to control. Here's some internal stuff that we're going to talk about inside the hive. So the biggest one, I think that one of the biggest ones that we deal with in California are mites. Usually these mites are called varroa. It's the varroa mite. So what happens with these mites? They will form and they will grow inside the cell while the bee is developing. So into the pupa. And the problem that comes in here is that when the bee pops out of the cell and is born as a bee, the mite has duplicated 2 or 3 or 4 times, and now you have mite infestation. The mites come out of that cell, they attach themselves on other bees. They will then the mite will lay its own eggs inside of the cells that will then grow onto the next batch of baby bees. And so you'll see that the mite, it eats fat body tissue on the bee, and will cause a whole plethora of issues with the bees themselves. Where this becomes a problem for the bigger hive, because it's sad enough when you lose some bees, right? But in this scenario, when we're talking about like a mite infestation, when there's too many mites in there and the bees know that they're there, the bees, if it comes too hard for them to combat, they'll just leave, right? And this is where you'll have either a colony collapse, the bees will eventually just die off, or you'll have a split. Healthy bees will leave and only the sick bees will remain, and then they'll die off. And you're like, what happened to my bees? They're all dead. Keep those bees as happy as possible in your box. And so varroa mites is one of those things that we have to actively manage for. There are some natural, I'll say natural ways that we can try to combat them. We'll talk about some of them. There's also testing we can do to measure the percentage of mites that are in the box. And then when that percentage gets too high, then we have to treat and use bee safe chemicals inside the hive to kill off the mites. This is what one looks like on the bee. So you can see these are tiny little red dots. Oftentimes when managing, like I knew that there's going to be mites in there, right? Like it's almost guaranteed there's going to be some mites, but too many mites is your problem. And almost never have I seen, while managing a hive, actually seen the mite like this on the bee. So it is something that you have to test for and look for actively. One of those ways that you can test for is called the sugar roll testing. This is what CAMP suggests doing. It uses powder sugar. Yes, the stuff you buy and put in cake. And the idea is through this process that powder sugar coats the bee and it suffocates the mite, and the mite lets go of the bee. So you're testing a batch of bees, and then you're looking for a ratio of that, that half cup or 300 bees, how many mites are found after the test. This sugar roll test does not kill the bees. Some people would say that this might be less effective. There is another, I'm sure, method that you'll hear about. I know several of you're talking about watching YouTube videos. That's pretty normal. There's another test that does actually kill the bees using alcohol. And then, you're getting a really accurate count of the mites, but you're killing off some of your nurse bees, your younger bees, right, which are taking care of your hive. And so pros and cons, this is the method that CAMP looks to. And then what's great, you put those bees back into the hive. I'm sure they're disoriented, but they're covered in sugar. So everybody is happy that they're coming back in, and all the girls clean them up and have a carb rush, sugar rush. So we talked about testing. We talked about then potentially treating. And you'll see that there's some natural HopGuard, ApiGuard, Mite Away. These are very commonly used in my area for treating mites. There's also then some synthetic or chemical that can be used to treat for those mites. And these are, you'll see in this picture here, it's basically you're putting in some sort of pad or container with the chemical in it that sits inside the hive for like a week to 2 weeks. Some of them are very specific to how hot or cold the temperatures can be outside. Some of them are very specific that you cannot use during honey collection. Like this poison that you're putting into the hive will actually infect your honey. And so some of these chemicals you cannot have honey supers on while you're treating for the mites. One way, it's often called integrated pest management, or IPM. There are certain ways that we can try to help limit the amount of mites or beetles or moths with other equipment. And so this frame you'll see is a green frame. These are often used for creating drone. Although you can get plastic frames like this for normal size worker bees, but this frame is sold in size for drones, which is bigger than a worker bee, right? And so putting this into the hive, one of these in each box of brood, will encourage the bees to build out wax comb in this larger format. Because the cells are larger, the the queen bee will lay drone eggs into these larger cells. And the idea is that we're raising drones on these cells, but before those drones can hatch out, we're going to remove this frame and kill off those drones. The reason that mites are more readily growing on drones is because if you remember on like the 5th slide we saw this morning, when we're looking at time in cell before the bee hatches out, the drone is in that cell longer, which gives the mite more chance to grow and duplicate. And so typically, this is one way we can also help manage mite production inside the hive is by pulling out drone cells where it's more likely that the mites would be growing inside. Another way for mites and or like for beetles, there's beetle traps, little plastic inserts that you can put in with oil that will trap the beetles. Some people use different methods on their bottom board of the woodenware hive to trap beetles or mites onto the bottom. So there's a lot of different ways we can try to treat this before we go into the chemical or even natural treatment of mites. But it's a process. It's an ongoing thing. It's an all the time thing that we have to worry about and think about. You'll see the coverage. I mean, the mites are everywhere. So there's no real safe area. I mean, maybe here in Africa somewhere. But I'm wondering if that's because of their more hygienic bees there or more defensive bees there too. But yeah, mites is a huge problem for beekeeping. Yeah, so there's mentioned. So after treating, you see a lot more mites fall off. Yeah, the bottom board and different ways to manage that, right? If you're testing or you're actually seeing the mites, chances are if you're seeing the mites, there's probably a lot in there because they usually do a good job of hiding. So colony collapse disorder is a term that's used. I've already used it when we were just talking about mites. It's used as kind of a general term when either the bees die off, when the bees disappear, like you go out to go manage your bees one day and they were there last week and now you open the box and they're gone. And maybe you see a pile of dead bees on the floor or something and you have no idea what happened, right? Now, there are some things that we can see and look for, like when there's a split and there just wasn't enough space inside of those boxes for the bees. When they split and leave, there's signs that we can look for to recognize what that was. But when the bees are just gone or they're just dead out of the blue, it's really, really hard to identify what exactly it was. And so the idea of colony collapse is that even though there was a living queen or there was a living queen, you look in those cells and maybe you see pupa or you see eggs, but the bees are gone. It wasn't a queen problem, right? She was laying. For some other reason, the bees had to bail. This is referred to as colony collapse. So many different reasons could be the problem: poor nutrition, parasites, pesticides, diseases, viruses. Even maybe something that you're doing when you're managing them, right? And so this is why several of you mentioned having mentors. It's a great resource to have somebody there with you to walk through it with you, and great for you to continue your education with camp because you're going to learn more about each of these things as you go through. So just looking at some statistics, colony collapse has become a really big deal in the States. Obviously, scientists have become more involved trying to figure out some of the issues of these. I think a lot of people point to pesticides because it becomes so prevalent in our state. But we have about half of the hives, right? So these are commercial beekeepers, these are backyard beekeepers, probably even more so commercial beekeepers because they're the ones that are actually communicating and reporting statistics to the agencies that handle this. I know very few backyard beekeepers that when they lose a hive, they're going to report it somewhere, right? You're going to have a bad day. You might cry a little, right? Like, and then you go, gosh, am I going to keep doing this? You go get another colony somewhere. But it's the commercial guys usually that are reporting these statistics. About half. And if they're losing a half, like think about your bees in your backyard, right? Especially for you that are new coming into this. So if you have a loss of a hive, like it happens, unfortunately, keep moving forward with learning how to hopefully avoid it. You can see what that has looked like over the last 10, 20 years, almost 20 years, 10, 15 years. You can see these spikes of loss reported. Some backyard beekeepers do report, but fewer. So just a quick snapshot of what people are trying to do to try to combat this issue, this kind of unknown cause issue. EPA is involved, a lot of universities, more studies going into chemicals. All right. These last couple sections as we come into our final hour. Oh gosh, we're already there. All right. Before we jump in here, I think we're looking good on time too. So this gets really practical. I love this section because I feel like this is everyday stuff that we all have to deal with as beekeepers. And it's really tangible. Like this is stuff that we can see and we have to touch. So I expect some additional questions as we come through here. Let's go ahead and take another quick break. Yeah, let's go ahead and do 10. I want to make sure we hit this last section kind of lively and awake. And so I'll see you back here at 11:20. We'll pick it back up. All right, sorry for the crazy slide. So this next section, we're talking about equipment. Now, some of this, it sounds like you are already in. You guys are already beekeeping hands-on. So we're going to talk about some of the equipment, some of the costs involved. This section is kind of focused on a couple different things: woodenware, the actual hive boxes, the hive themselves, the protective gear, the stuff that we need to have, and then some additional tools. I love to give any insight or answer any questions that comes in here too. I've tried some different things over the years, and there's some specialty things that I've seen that people don't really use, and so there's some different perspectives that come into this section. So in general, we have some sort of hive stand. That can be some sort of block like this. I've seen cinder blocks used. I had rebar, kind of like bent rebar that were made for holding hives, but they were just kind of a basic, stand of steel. There's some that are fancy that actually have leveling legs on them, leveling legs and cups with you could fill with oil to help protect against ants. Somebody asked about ants earlier. Yeah, some sort of oil moat, if you will, on the leg. I've seen like simple rebar or steel legs that are inside of like a coffee can full of oil, like usually like an olive oil, like a baking oil or cooking oil. I've also seen sprays that you can spray the leg of something that creates a slick barrier so the ants can't climb on it. So there's many different types of hive stands. Then you've got your bottom board. I'm working like from the ground up, right? Then you've got your bottom board. The bottom board largely are made out of wood. I have seen some that have insert areas where you can actually swap in and out a sticky board on the bottom, which might help with some of those pests, namely beetles or mites. I've seen some that are ventilated, where that bottom board has a screen that allows airflow up through the bottom of the board. A lot of those kind of what ifs and should I do this or that largely comes down to climate. If it's wet, if it's hot, those kind of things. Notice that the boxes, again, moving up to the next level, there's something called it's noted here on the slide as a brood chamber. Most people will use a deep, like commercial keepers will use all deep boxes. And they are trying to, the reason for that is usually efficiency. When I started beekeeping, I got all deep boxes because I figure if the bees are building comb on those frames, I want those frames to be as big as possible. And if they're going to be building in this brood area, I want to give them as much space as possible to have a larger amount of bees in this box. However, as I started working for the South Coast Research Center here locally, the OCB team, which is under CAMP's umbrella, I noticed something different. And there, they use all medium boxes. And the medium box, what you're seeing on your screen looks to me almost like a deep box and then a small box. A medium box looks like somewhere in between almost. And interestingly enough, even though it's shown in this picture, this small or shallow box I've almost never seen in real life. And so here it's largely either deep or it's mediums. The reason they use mediums at the research center is because they have all sorts of people of all sorts of ages manipulating these boxes, right? So when you get a 70-year-old woman out there trying to remove a honey super that weighs 50, 60 pounds, if it was a deep, it would be over 100, no problem. And so the mindset there was to have all consistent sizing, which I love the idea of that. So you can switch a box, just the outer box, whether you're using it for brood or whether you're using it for honey, You can switch them up and down. So even though I started with the mentality of all deep, even for me, they got kind of heavy at different times. And not just heavy like I couldn't lift them, but heavy to like lift and then move, or to manipulate, sometimes in an awkward stance or something, right? They're heavy. So personally, I love now the idea of medium boxes, but it's all just a big personal preference. I love the idea of having all the same size box, like I said, so I can switch them out. If I have one box that's a honey super on one hive, and then I move it over to a different hive, I can just switch out those boxes. It also allows me to use the same frame size. So each one of those boxes holds 10 frames, right? If I have to manage, I need 5 frames in this box, or I need to move 2 frames from that hive to that hive, and now I have to worry about what size they are on top of that. It's just more stuff to deal with mentally, right? Or you have excess equipment on hand because you might need it in 2 different sizes and in 2 different boxes, and right, you can see that. So if you're already in it, it's possible to change. It is more difficult to go from a large deep box into a medium box, because those large frames will not fit into the medium box. You're gonna have to transition in some other way to those medium-sized frames, and maybe that's just with a new future colony, or if you're gonna switch vice versa, right? The typical setup in historically, and when all the examples like you're seeing in this picture, they largely will show you a brood chamber being deep, giving you bigger areas for the bees themselves to live in. In that area, they've got babies, they've got drones, the workers are going, the queen is laying. Largely, kind of the bigger the better in essence, right? With that, you might want 2 of those deep brood boxes before you would think about collecting honey, extra honey that you're going to take away from them, right? So they're making their own honey in that brood chamber for what they need. And when it's big enough, then you're thinking, okay, now they're established, they have their own food stores, you're checking it and making sure. Now we're going to put a honey super on to collect additional honey that I'm going to take from them. That brood chamber, again, maybe 2 boxes that are deep. If you're running mediums, you maybe would want like 3 medium boxes for that brood chamber before you put on the queen excluder. So this screen is just appropriately spaced. It can be metal, it can be plastic, so that the worker bees can go up and down through this, because they're going to be building this out with comb. They're going to be filling this up with honey, but you don't want the queen going up through here, because she would start laying in those cells as it gets big enough. And then when you have babies in here, that's not honey that you want to take anymore, right? So you want to keep this honey only, no queen laying up here. And that's what this queen excluder is for. There's 2 different types of covers. This one is called an inner cover and an outer cover. This cover would be fitting on the outside, full, encompassing on 4 sides, the sides at the top of that box. This might be better for areas that are windy or have more weather, more water. I think it's called telescopic hive. It's covering all of the edges of the hive. There's another type of cover that I have used just more personally that does not have an extra piece here, but the cover goes on top and only has a front edge and a back edge. So when I go to manage, I can get my hive tool on this side crack and pop the top off. That's called a migratory lid. So the idea that somebody, if you're moving your bees, you're going to strap them down and move them, you want to be able to get that lid off more quickly. That's just what they're called. This telescopic lid, you have to have this inner cover in place, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to access this lid to get your hive tool underneath to like pop it off. So if you do the more kind of weatherproofed, if you want to call it that, or more covered cover like this, you would need to have an inner cover as well. So again, at each step, we're talking about options. Hive stand options, bottom board options, box size options. The excluder is kind of a given, and then the cover options too. So there's a lot that kind of goes into these decisions. And maybe you try one and you don't like it and you want to switch later. It happens both ways. Again, there's no one perfect answer for this setup. Any other notes I want to make on this before I change slides? Oh, thanks. Pablo mentioned, so there's also, and I remember learning about this when I was getting into it, but in real life practical, I've never seen anybody run 8 frames. So this typical box is a 10 frame wide, right? If we want to talk about this being a width, 10 frames here. And And so 10 is kind of the norm, especially for commercial. Commercial would be running 10 frame deeps all day long. Otherwise, you want to go smaller, lighter, you might go mediums, still 10 frames. There is also an option for boxes that are made for only 8 frames. And I would say the biggest benefit there is just the idea of weight, right? It's less weight, it's a little bit less wide. The downside, though, is that your equipment may not match. You're going to have to buy specialized equipment. So like your bottom board would be sized for 8 frame. Your queen excluder would have to be sized for 8 frame. Your lid and all these other pieces would all have to be dedicated to that width. Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it's another thing you have to keep in mind. There's some people that buy a nuke, right? Buy a batch of bees that we'll talk about in a little bit. There's some people that run 5 frame boxes, like nuke size boxes, just again for size and weight. Again, I'm not saying it's bad, but anytime you go into something that's different than the norm, you just realize you have to buy all, a whole set of equipment that matches that width. Much easier to handle by yourself. Yeah. Again, the weight is the biggest deal because you don't think about it, but the wood, the frames, that kind of adds up. Then you have wax in there. Then you have a ton of bees, which the bees don't add that much weight. But if it's full of honey, those boxes get heavy. Does your new nuke determine your hive? No. Most nukes, again, because commercial guys run 10 deeps, most nukes will come with deep frames. So in that regard, you would have to place them into a deep box. But as far as your additional hives or future hives, if you're moving bees, if you're collecting swarms, you can transition into smaller frames if that's the size that you run. But I guess what you're saying, yeah, and I kind of agree, I guess, in that sense, is if you're buying a nuke, those nukes are likely going to come on 10 deeps. So you're going to have to at least start with a deep box. Practical standpoint, how frequently do you have to attend to your bees? For example, is it practical that you should, what just happened? Sorry. You could have a colony at a vacation home that you visit every 2 to 3 weeks. I would say it depends, Rob. So 2 to 3 weeks, it's possible. The problem is in your high activity seasons, like in spring, I would say that 2 to 3 weeks is probably too long because we saw how quickly the baby bees grow, right? And that queen can grow in less than, or just over 2 weeks, like 16 days. So if there's an issue in that hive and the workers are creating supersedure cells or they're preparing for a split, you're going to start seeing queen cells being built. If you're 3 weeks in between, like that happens, and then the queen is actually birthed, and this, like, next time you go, the bees could be gone. And so in a heavy build season, you may have to add boxes, but that active management, like 1 to 2 weeks, you're going to be able to catch more potential issues that come up, especially in the springtime. Transferred from 10 to 8. Yeah. Cool. So I'm glad. I love that you guys are active. We're all in there chatting. It's good. When do you add a second brood deep in the first? So second brood box comes on when you need more space. So when you put in your 5 frames of, say you get a nuke, it's 5 frames of bees and food and babies. You've only got 5 frames left to build in here, right? And that's one of the benefits of spending more money on a nuke when you're buying bees. We'll talk about that still. But chances are you're going to have to add on to that more soon, right? So when you get into like 8 frames full, or the bees are on that 9th frame, you want to make sure you get the second box in there. Because if they sense that they're getting too full in there and there's more babies being born, they're going to prep to leave. They're going to prep to split. So you want to get the second box on there around about 8 frames full. Then you get up to second, you get bees up into that second box. You got a bigger brood going on. Then you can maybe look to add that queen excluder and start collecting some honey. And sometimes it's give and take. You're like, oh, I'll put this honey super on. And they only put 3 frames of honey in. But now there's no bees up there when I inspect. So then I go into the brood frame and I notice that there's very little honey in the bottom, but a lot of brood. Well, okay, I need to stop taking honey away from them. I need to give them more resources, either give them sugar or let them keep more of their honey. So the active management thing is kind of like an ongoing, you're interacting with the bees and trying to figure out what they need. or they'll just leave. Different options. You can buy, and it's like on the cheaper end, you're just getting the lumber in pieces and then you're having to build it together. I've done that. It's not fun, but I'm pretty handy. I mean, I can do it. But the cost, isn't that much different. Maybe more so in shipping if you have to get stuff shipped to get things fully assembled, like a full box and all the frames. I also like using plastic inserts. So I have a woodenware frame that has a plastic sheet on the inside space, and that gives the bees something to jump on and start building on right away. If you're spinning for honey, it's really helpful to have some plastic in the middle because it's more rigid. It holds up better to the extraction process. The bees can build all their own wax on there. It takes longer. It's more fragile. You can also, I know people that run wire on those frames for honey collection if they're going to be cutting out the comb with the honey. In the brood chamber specifically, again, plastic for me is what I've chosen to go with because again, it gives something for the bees to build on more quickly. And that's like a plastic, like a poured injection plastic thing that has kind of the edging, and then they usually put wax on it so that the bees jump right on it. Here's some pictures of that. They do actually sell wax inserts too if you're going to be maybe cutting out the wax and the comb together for human use. I've seen too at the research center, they'll use black frames plastic in the middle. Yeah, there goes the question in the chat. Black in the brood box. And one of the nice things about black is that when you're looking into that cell, depending on how much light you have, it's easier to see that egg if there's a black backdrop. So you can look down inside the cell and you see the black at the bottom, and then you can see some white royal jelly, or you can see the egg that's sitting in the bottom of that cell. And then to separate at the research center, they use the lighter colored yellow ones for the honey supers. And the reason is for them, I believe, is just to switch it up so that you can identify, okay, here's the black one. We use this for the brood. We'll never take wax off of that. At least take wax off to use. The yellow ones we're using for honey, and that's going to be more virgin wax. But again, the whether it's a medium box or deep box, that dictates what size you're getting here too. Personally, I've just used all one color because I feel like the more stuff I have to manage, different sizes, different colors, different things, it's just more complicated. Yeah, Pablo.
So I want to expand a little bit. I have a read you want to add some wax, melt wax, and add to the plastic frames. So because what I learned is there's for bees to produce wax, they need 10 pounds of honey for 1 pound of wax. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but they use a lot of energy making the wax for their brood. So my question is, and another comment was that you have, before you add the queen excluder, you want to let the bees start working with the wax a few weeks, and then you add the queen excluders to give them more freedom to go through the next box to the super or to wherever. So do you suggest or you think, are you in that school of thought that to start adding more wax and give the bees a little break from producing wax to generate more honey, or gain some time, or you just let them more naturally develop their home at their own pace? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So drawn comb, which is the term used for comb established wax on the frame, ready to use for the bees, is like gold for the beekeeper, right? So if you have that established and you have a store of that somewhere, that's amazing. Usually when I buy plastic inserts or when I buy frames with the plastic, they almost always come with some layer of wax on them. And I have heard it referenced less so that they're going to use that thin layer of wax to actually start making more wax, but it gives them a foundation to jump on, and it's less that they have to produce. I think is what you're getting at. But it also, when there's a material with wax, that's a known substance for them, right? They know the smell, they know the feel. If you're throwing bees onto something plastic, Like that's not a normal, like what do we do with that, right? So the idea of putting wax on it is, I think from my perspective, a little bit more of like a comfort. Usually when I'm moving bees, I'm going to spray that frame with like sugar water, simple syrup, because again, they know that, they smell it, they need it, right? Like I want to keep them on there, or make it more attractive for them. I personally, from what you said, one thing I'd want to veer away from, for me, if I'm setting up honey supers, I'm going to put the queen excluder in right away. The queen excluder might technically slow the bees down, but the workers can go up and down. I do not want to give any, I don't want to give the queen any opportunity to go up into those honey supers, because as soon as a cell is cupped, maybe not even fully built, if they're running out of space, maybe you have other problems, but the queen can start laying in a non fully formed cell. And I don't want eggs anywhere near those honey supers, right? Because then it just changes the whole purpose for the box. So I would say if you're going to put a honey super on, personally, I'd put the queen excluder on right away. But yeah, but the bees do need sugar to create that wax. So also for a new colony going in, and if you have non-formed, like not pulled comb, you have plastic foundation, I would say absolutely feed them, because they're going to need that sugar water as much as possible to create that wax. Awesome, good question. We'll go through. We're kind of running a little bit short on time, and some of you, it sounds like a lot of you are already working with bees, and so I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly on the protective gear, because I'm assuming, or I'm hoping you already have it. There's a couple different face shields. Some are more structured like this, where there's a hat on top and a veil overhead. Mine is a little bit more floppy and looks a little bit less structured, but it has like a veil that holds it off my head. And I do not have a net guard. My suit is kind of a one piece, like a jumpsuit model. I know people that go into hives barehanded. I know people that go into hives with no shoes on or like flip flops on. I was with a friend a couple weeks back, and I helped her remove a hive, and she had flip flops, jeans, and a shirt that had a veil on it. And that shirt was loose around her pants. And I'm like, what are you doing? Now you can do whatever you want. When I'm working with bees, I already told you, I hate getting stung. There's no way in the world I want to be trapped in my suit with a bee inside my suit getting stung. Like that just sounds like a nightmare to me, right? So when I work with bees, I have leather gloves. I have like 10-inch high leather boots that my suit wraps around. Some people, if you're going into a hot hive situation, I know some people that duct tape their pants onto their boots and duct tape their wrists onto their gloves. I've never had to do that, but just to kind of show you the other extreme, right? Of like, there's not a bee getting in this thing. But obviously, your protective gear is super important. You want to have some sort of protective shoes that are comfortable, that are safe. Minimum, you want to have protection over your face. Because if those bees start stinging you and you're stinging your face, like you're going to be in trouble, even if you're not allergic. You're going to swell and it's going to be super painful. Somebody asked real quick, just to reference back, do you ever need a second super, like a honey super? There are circumstances where maybe you'd put on a second honey super and you can't remove the other first super. So it's possible to maybe have a second honey super, but I would say in normal practice, you might want to switch them out. Like, oh, the first one's full, we're going to put on a second one, pull the old frames, put in the new frames. That also gives you more chance that you're going to keep that honey, because if something goes wrong in between inspections and the bees are going to swarm, they'll go up and eat that honey, or they'll start moving it. Smoker, number one tool, 100%. You need to have a smoker. Again, the bee movie I mentioned earlier, where the smoke comes in and they're all like, woo, we're good. It doesn't actually like have an effect on the bees like that. It's not like a cannabis type thing. But what it does do is it masks pheromones. So if there's an upset bee, if there's a bee that stings even your glove, right, that releases a pheromone and the bees are alerted to that. And so the smoke helps hide and mask some of those pheromones. So it doesn't make them calmer per se, but it does lessen their ability to get heightened, if that makes sense. Hive tools, there's a couple different standard types that are kind of pictured here. I have one of these, but have never used it. I kind of use this style personally, but everybody kind of has a different feel for this. but the big parts that you have to have some sort of metal edge to be able to get in between the seam of a wooden box and to pop it open and separate it, because sometimes that propylene is like sealing that cracks. So you need a sharper edge to be able to get in and pop. Most of these will have some sort of nail puller. Like if you're in a situation and a nail is sticking out of a box that might like grab your suit and rip it, like there's usually like a nail puller piece or opening on there. And then I think on this style, this like kind of loop is a tool where it might help you pop open the frame out of the inside of the box. But so basically these are the two kind of bigger, most popular designs that, those three functions are, work with these. Another quick question about the equipment. Boots inside your pants. Yes. Well, that's how I do it. My pants fit over my boots, and then they have like an elastic band. There's a lot of different, you can buy a suit on Amazon. I spent the most money I could afford to buy my suit. I wanted like the most protection and the coolest, because when you're in that suit, it could be chilly outside and you're still sweating. Like, so mine is like a super breathable, like you can see through it. Anyhow, you can do a ton of research on that stuff. I changed the title of this slide from when I saw it because I wanted to throw this out again, practical perspective, to be efficient, thinking about what your costs are going to be and be efficient with that. So I've talked about this a little bit already with the equipment. Like if you're picking a size box, like the most efficient way to go is to get multiple sizes that are the same, where you can interchange them easily. Again, I mentioned this before. You're getting it in loose wood versus you assembling it and priming it and gluing it and clamping it. Do you have that equipment? Do you, are you handy? Is it local or do you have to have it shipped? These are all different variables to take into consideration when you're ordering stuff. Saving, building, painting, yeah. And once you have like your woodenware, like you're going to have that for a while, right? Like that could last you 5 years, 10 years. So it seems like a lot of money going in, especially when like during the pandemic, wood got super expensive, right? So if you had to buy equipment during that time, like you're paying double what you would have had to otherwise. But this cost when you're going into it, this wooden material is going to last for a while. It's also the first note here. When you have two hives, and some of you have mentioned you've lost a hive already. When you have two hives and you need like, oh, this one's doing awesome and this one's not doing well. Well, I need an extra frame of honey I can pull out of this one and put in this one. And they're all the same size frame. They're all the same size boxes, right? So you can almost literally flip them back and forth. Oh, this one's short on brood. Something's wrong with the queen. There's no eggs in there. Oh, I'm going to take a frame of eggs from this one and put it in this one. Like having two hives allows you to react a little bit easier versus just the one hive. If you're out of something or something's wrong or you're missing something, I mean, there's a higher probability that you're going to lose that colony. So actual cost, basically if you're talking all in, equipment, smoker, suit, tool, and then you're talking about the colony and the hive itself, wood boxes, feeders, excluder. I mean, you're probably looking at about $1,000 in, is my kind of perspective. However you're buying your bees, if you're buying them as a package in a box, or if you're buying them as a nuke, those are going to be more expensive, but they're already established. I remember a couple years back, I saw a post on I forgot what social media it was, but it was like, oh, I'm a beekeeper, 30-year beekeeper. I'm selling my hives, 100 hives to sell. It's like, oh my gosh, like I don't have space for 100 hives, but maybe I could buy 2. You're going to be spending way more money, right? But the bees are there, the frames are built, the equipment's there. So there's just really a lot of different ways you can kind of manage this money. But I know this says lower end, 350 to 5. I'd say, probably closer to $1,000 once you're talking about bees and equipment, safety equipment. Ongoing costs too. There are ongoing costs, right? So I mentioned here in Southern California, we have to think about requeening. That's like $50-$75 a pop for a queen. And so every time I like collect a swarm, like, oh, come get your free bees. Please help me remove the free bees at my house. I email those people or I message those people on social media and just let them know, hey, by the way, this is not free to me. Like I have to have the equipment. I have to have the know-how. I have to at least buy a queen. There's money out of pocket for me to take your bees, including the requeening. excuse me, chances are, equipment can go bad or can wear down over time. You do have to replace that stuff, but that's like a 5-year frame plus. As you're buying new bees, more cost there too. One of the things too for me is the food, right? In winter and in summer, potentially, where you're gonna have to actually buy, you're gonna have to go to Costco or Smart and Final, and you're picking up 50-pound bags of sugar. That can get expensive depending on how many colonies you have. Also, something to think about. I have a freezer, so the ability to take a frame out of your box, and even if you're keeping it for honey for yourself, to be able to freeze it to kill off any bugs that might be in there, bees, mites, beetles, whatever else. You want to freeze it for at least a day. And so having a freezer that you can fit honey frames in, or to fit other frames in, or hey, I pulled out this honey frame, I'm going to give it back to my bees later. Or I pulled out this frame, the bees left, there's something wrong in there, I want to make sure it's cleaned out and everything in there is dead, I'm going to freeze it. So having a freezer is one of those things. It's like, it's a useful tool. You don't have to have it, but it's a useful tool that you can think about. Like, that's an ongoing cost that you might have in the future, especially if you're increasing the number of hives you have. And there's a lot of people that get creative on this stuff too, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna build my own frames. I'm gonna go use plywood. Well, you can. Plywood has formaldehyde. Moisture can mess up plywood more than regular lumber. There will be moisture inside of your bee box naturally. So like, yeah, you can do certain things to like build your own boxes or do things maybe on a cheaper level. But do your research on that. Oh, that's funny. Free swap, just talked about this. Yeah, and I would suggest too, even though it sounds like, oh, I'm gonna get a second hive, I'm gonna go collect a swarm. I would say if you can wait, try to get more experience or have a mentor go with you to do it. Removing the bees, rehoming the bees into your equipment, making sure they have everything they need after they're in your equipment. Is the queen still in there? Is she still laying? Is she alive? Um, swarms can be pretty tricky. They're not free. And even after you get them in your home and the queen's in there laying, do you have to requeen? Do you have to feed them? So yeah, definitely not free. How are we doing? I feel like I'm in that rush stage now where I'm going to start talking faster or something. But we're close to the end. We'll see a couple slides here. I'm going to walk through some real basic steps if you're going to be installing. Kevin, I think you mentioned installing a bee package, but you have a mentor, so I'm grateful you have hands-on help there. There's a couple different ways you can get bees, right? One, I just mentioned, right? You're going to buy bees or somebody brought bees to you and then they disappeared, Pablo. So when you're getting bees and it's a whole colony, they can be more difficult to handle. The more bees there are, there's just more details that come in, right? They're established and maybe they don't like to get moved, right? There's a downside of this too. You don't actually get to grow with the bees as a new beekeeper. You're getting them and they're working and you don't know what you're doing yet, but they're kind of living on their own. But this is one way that people do get bees. Ordering online, I mentioned the swarm collection, obviously, but that can be a challenge for a new beekeeper for sure. Here's two big options for you. If you're buying bees, you're paying money to get bees. This is what a package looks like. It's literally a box of bees. And the queen is in a little box separated so that you can make sure that she stays safe and place her in this box. And then what we're seeing this picture on the left is called a nuke. The nuke is short for nucleus colony, I think is what it's called, referred to. So basically what's coming in here is 5 frames of bees. So there's already bees, there's already some honey stores, there's already baby bees growing in this box. So there's definite benefits to a nuke because the colony is already existing together and they're already on comb. It's going to cost more money though, because you're getting this equipment, right, in the package. All vendors are not equal. If you can, again, this is what's great about having a club resource or maybe a local shop resource, is that you're going to know and maybe even be able to visit where these bees are coming from. In California here, almost all of this happens up north unless you're buying out of state. Yeah, and if it's too good to be true, right? Here, a new package of bees just selling you off, $100. You're like, that sounds cheap. There's probably a reason why. Bees don't travel that well. And so oftentimes with the local club, like our local club here, will put in an order. We'll gather orders from all the members, and then they'll order like 100 or 200 packages at once. And then somebody goes up and stays the night and then drives them in one day. So they're only on the road for like a day or two. And so they can, when transporting with bees, temperature can be an issue. Food source can be an issue. They say ventilation, temperature. Those are the big ones. So if you imagine that, that truck or those bees get loaded into a truck, and then they're in the distribution center, and then they're on another truck, and then you're getting to your house a week later, like a lot more of those bees are going to be dead than you would otherwise, right? So depending on how you're getting them, just keep that in mind and how you're getting your bees. Local is great if you can do it. Also thinking about when you go pick them up, right? You're gonna have to pick them up. You're gonna have to put them in your car, in your van, or something. Usually, these packages are pretty small. You can get them into a trunk of a normal car. A nuke might be a little bit more difficult to handle, just because it's going to be heavier. But a lot of factors that come into play: date, weather. Like y'all, I'm seeing messages. Oh my gosh, it's dumping now. It's raining, right? If today was bee pickup day, like that's going to be a particular challenge. You got to take them home. You got to store them somewhere for a bit, somewhere cool and dry. You're probably going to want to spray them with some sort of water or simple syrup so that they have moisture to use if they need it. Once at home, there you go. Spray with cool water, dark, cool place. So I've had packages I think for 2 days in my garage before, with still a successful, transfer after that. It is a trip to think though that you have like these, hundreds of thousands of bees like in your house. Ideally, we want to go late afternoon, so when the sun is still up, but when it's close to the resting time. You want to have some sort of light so that they can sense like it's daytime and we're doing this thing, but then a short period of time before rest. And so again, raining and windy, we want to wait till the next day. And usually they'll be okay, for a day or two in the garage. So again, I'm going to take these steps a little bit more quickly, but here's your package. Inside that package would have some sort of simple syrup food source, and then some sort of tab or a metal thing that's holding the queen box, the queen cage, they call it. From the side view, you can see what that can looks like here with the food in it and what the queen box looks like. The idea here is we want to take out the queen cell. That's our priority in this first step. So you have to remove the food can, pull the queen cage out, put the food can back in or cover it up with something as quickly as possible so you don't have a ton of bees coming out. Mind you, all of this setup, you're at the hive after the ground is prepared, your stand is in place, your boxes are in place, you've got your foundation there, you got your spray, your smoker, your simple syrup spray bottle, all the stuff is here ready to go. You take that queen and put her in your pocket to keep it safe. And then you're literally shaking, this seems traumatic, but you're shaking the box of bees into the box. You can, again, before I even get to this step, I would often, if I'm going to do this, go through this process, I would be spraying each individual frame with some simple syrup. I would be drizzling some simple syrup on the frames. I'd be putting, if I had extra honey laying around, I'd be putting some honey on those frames, because when those bees go into that box, I want to give them every opportunity to go like, oh, this is awesome in here. And so they can jump on the frames right away. But if you have to, if they're, just like totally disoriented and laying down and like not moving, sometimes it helps to kind of get them onto the frames if you need to. You'll notice at the front hole, giving them some sort of orientation of where the exit is can be helpful. So some sort of, just for a day, some sort of grass or a stick or something that you're putting out on the outside so they can go, okay, wait, that's the road to outside. I've used rubber bands before too, but if there's a metal strip on your queen cage, you want to put that into the middle. You want her to get associated with the frames in the middle. That's where she's going to be laying first. And this little queen cage on one side will have candy, or potentially you can stick a marshmallow in there. But the idea is is that with the queen in the middle, the worker bees are going to release her. And so they're going to eat that away and release her, free her into the hive. Depending on your situation, oftentimes early with it, especially with a new package, I would have some sort of feed available. This shows pollen patties as well. So if you have a nuke and there's babies, you might want to check those frames or just be a little bit cautious and give them extra protein, pollen patty on top. And after the bees are in there, right, making sure that the frames are equally spaced, you have some spacing on the sides of the box, that they all are free to move around in there. This is a picture of a top feeder or a cover that would cover a top feeder. Some sort of weight usually on top of, again, depending on your weather and your climate, right? If it's windy, if it's rainy, you might have to support the top lid, put a strap on it potentially, or at least heavy bricks or rock or something. And here's just, again, just a general seasonal guide. So, and I'm starting off this timeline in spring because chances are you're going to get your bees in spring, right? And so initially we're talking about every week, week and a half, you're getting into that colony to check out. You're going to be feeding when necessary. Simple syrup, usually it's like a 1-to-1 water to syrup or water to sugar. And then during this time is also when the colony might be growing. So you might have to add boxes or potentially split boxes at some point. In summer, when it gets more hot, you can kind of space out those visits because they're going to be needing less. They're going to be bringing in less, but you want to make sure that they have sufficient food stores in there and that you're feeding them when needed. If there's any honey in there, and at that point they might need it, so you're going to have to make that decision. How much honey are you going to leave for them? How much are you going to take coming out of spring? And potentially treatment at this point as well. And ideally, when you're not collecting honey, best to treat if you can wait. In fall, and again, a lot of this again comes down to your geography, what plants are available, what the weather's like. But in fall, you might still be potentially feeding, checking for pollen, preparing for winter. So for the standard kind of season, if you will, for bees is largely in spring. And so people might think about buying a package, that box of bees, and you're putting them into frames of plastic frames into a box. You're not going to be able to collect honey that year. It's going to be the next year. If you're getting a nuke and they're already active and you're immediately putting additional frames in, you might be able to get honey that year. That's another benefit to a nuke. Pros and cons again. They're more expensive though. So you can see from this loose timeline, the biggest time that you're going to be able to produce and collect honey is spring and into summer. Outside of that, you're taking care of the bees and making sure. In Southern California, because our climate is a little bit more mild, more warm year round, there's rarely an off season where the bees are just dormant. Like they're usually active year round, maybe less active in winter, but still active. Sorry. There's a quick question that came in. The inner cover has a notch slot on one side. Oh yeah, thanks, Kim. All right, we're coming down to our last couple slides here. All just pictures to what I've already talked about. This is a picture of a pollen patty. There are ways to make this at home, but most people, from what I've seen, you buy it commercially. That's their protein source again. And for the carbohydrate, usually simple syrup, a 1-to-1 simple syrup. Coming down to our last, I think we're pretty much out of time, but some fun pictures of honey harvesting. I mean, it's such a great experience when you do it. It's a lot of work though. It's a lot of cleanup too, a lot of mess. I've heard people like, oh, I'm going to do it in my bathroom, or I'm going to go like, what was that movie where they like tarp off the entire room? The show was like for not good reasons, but for honey, it's like you want to tarp off in plastic pretty much whatever you can, because stuff will drip, stuff will splatter, stuff will fall off. And whether it's honey or it's melted wax, like if you're using a knife, it can be a mess. Most honey is pulled out by a centrifuge when you have multiple frames. It seems to be the most effective, most efficient, where the frames are actually spinning in the machine and the honey is pulling out, going through some sort of strainer. Notice when you go to the store and you buy honey, it says unfiltered. Usually commercial honey, when it's filtered, it means that it's forced through a very, very fine filter which takes out a lot of the good stuff like pollen remnants and other things out of the honey. It is normal in your home when you say unfiltered, right? Natural, unfiltered honey, you're not heating it. It is okay to strain it. And what you're straining out is bits of, potentially bee parts like bee legs. It happens. Pieces of wax that may have come off when you're extracting in the extractor. Any little bits of, maybe a dead moth is in there. Or it happens. Chunk of, wooden splinter that came off of the frame. So the strainer is okay. It's still considered unfiltered, even though you're straining out any bits. But there's some setups and kits that you can buy, like buckets and stuff, to catch the honey, the raw, loose honey and wax cappings and all that stuff. So this kind of becomes its own another step in this hobby, is getting all the equipment that you need for honey extraction. Yeah, question about pollen patty. That's correct. Yeah, you put the pollen patty up on top. Here's some general guidance. This is the capping that we talk about when you're using wax and pulling wax out of a hive to use, especially for like lip balm or those kind of things. You want this virgin cap wax. That's all you're using. And so you're getting very little out during the honey extraction process. That's why real beeswax is expensive. And that's what it looks like after the caps are cut. You've got just pure honey. It's helpful to have the weather a little bit warmer, but you don't want to do it outside, because if you were outside and a bee smells this, they will smell it. You are going to have a ton of bees around you really quick. So you want to do it inside. But being in a warmer environment is helpful for that wax to be a little bit warmer and more fluid. There's also a lot of options. You'll see this is a motorized extractor. They also have manual ones that you crank. Again, costs, time, energy is all these decisions that you need to make. It's super cool to watch though when that thing is spinning and you see the honey throwing off onto the sides and then gathering into the bottom and just pouring out into this thing. It's kind of glorious. And if you haven't heard, honey doesn't go bad. So you can keep honey pretty much forever. It's shelf stable. They found it in the pyramids. Still not bad after thousands of years. So you can see like this plastic table. This isn't me, obviously. But you can see the plastic tarp. He's got an apron on, right? Like it gets messy. And again, sometimes the equipment, you have to get some specialized equipment for doing this. But there's also some people that do like to pull and remove wax comb with the honey. I've never done this personally, but I've eaten it and it's good. But some people will sell that, for a premium too with the comb. Some cultures, I've heard people like in Europe really like. I've had somebody like in England, they're like, oh, I used to eat this on my toast, right? The comb and the honey together on the bread. And so culturally, I think there's some norms with that stuff. But again, some specialized equipment to gather the honey that way, or to cut the honey and comb that way. The rest slides have some additional links that I'm not going to go through, but they're available to you, and Keon's going to be giving you links for those. And of course, I can't speak highly enough about camp. It's amazing. I'm not getting paid to do this with you. I volunteered to do this with you today. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. And so that's just part of the camp thing, right? Like we want to educate, we want to learn together, we want to promote learning and helping those honeybees. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Rick. Always a pleasure to have you teach. And yeah, as you mentioned, we'll send out that recap for the next 2 or 3 days. We'll have a link to the slides by themselves, also a link to the whole recording. We'll also have the questions and answers included. And also, I recommend checking out the certification program that the California Master Beekeeper Program has. So if this class was of any use to you, we have 38 classes, right? There's a lot more you can learn. There's meat making, there's rearing your own queens, there's a ton of options. You can check them out on the class catalog on the website. And the certification program, as Rick said, he's a practical guy. And that's how we designed the program. It's designed to be useful for practical beekeepers. And then also we incorporate some of that scientific knowledge. So we are based out of UC Davis lab, and So we do have some in-person classes too, especially for the more advanced courses if you'd like to come check us out. But all the online courses are also really useful. I kind of view California Master Beekeeping Program Certification Program to complement your work with your local beekeeping organization. So go get involved. Reach out to your local beekeeping organization if you haven't already, because a lot of the questions that you ask, at the end of the day, Rick and I and the rest of us, we can't answer it for your specific situation, because people who live near you have a better understanding of really what is needed. Is very geography dependent. So getting involved locally is useful, and then California Master Beekeeper Program can help with the academic book knowledge you need. So thank you for taking the initiative to learn science-based beekeeping and spend time with us this Saturday morning, and hope to see you in future classes and in the rest of the certification program as well. Have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you again, Rick.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks, both you guys.
I can hang out for a few minutes too. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to chill for a few.